Hello there, Sir from 17 once again. This is more Dark Souls PvP, Iron and Rust. And we start off with a very appropriate backstab as the Boulder Man comes in for his next assault walk-up parry. I read it on the recording and at the time and punished him with the backstab. We go for the hit on Oki, we go for the backstep into the parry, we get kicked, he goes for the thrust with the Leo, doesn't quite catch it, we do the toggle, we roll behind him, we go for the mail breaker poke, but we don't quite get it also. There's the hit on the kick, and because of a low HP, he is vanquished. But in the previous video, I was talking about a brief history of Dark Souls PvP. We went through the nostalgia of the first game, we talked about the second game kind of not being my favourite, we talked about Bloodborne being an absolute comedy and just bizarre, and then we got to Dark Souls 3, the game people love to say is not as good as it is. As we get parried again, another parry, there we go, Bushka, right to the chest. That's what happens when you're predictable, guys, you got to mix up those swings. And again, oh, so many big hits. It'll be interesting to see if we can come back from this, but you never know. Dark Souls 3 is awesome. It's awesome for PvE, it's awesome for PvP. And I think the reason why people maybe have changed some of their opinions on it is just because it's been out a while, isn't it? It's one of those things where sometimes it can be easy to just get swayed by a new perspective or somebody coming in and saying that it wasn't that great. And admittedly, I do think that Dark Souls 3 was a little bit too derivative, it was a bit too homage-filled to this game. It could have tread new grounds, but after Dark Souls 2 changing everything so much and being such a unique game, and then Bloodborne being a completely different setting, I feel like coming back to that world and coming back to that familiarity was something that they were looking for. That right then looked like that could have been a parry on console, but not here. This connectivity mod and these servers, they might not look like good connections, guys, but I'm fighting someone in America here, and this is about as good as it gets. He's not skipping around, the parries are almost as close to one-to-one as you could want them. This is beautiful. And I fought this dude last night. We were actually doing free-for-alls 3 ways, and it was really silly. I ended up going in with a build that holds the Smose hammer, and as you can imagine, I could barely see the screen because that thing is huge, but we had a really good time. This game is awesome. But Dark Souls 3 PvP was really, really interesting. Because anyone who's a big fan of the channel, and we're talking old school here because it's been years, but on Dark Souls 3 I got into the network test, and I PvP'd a little bit after I'd killed the Dancer. Even though the Dancer in that network test was really hard. I don't know if anybody remembers that. That shit kicked my ass, and I'm not the worst at PvE, so it was interesting to see me struggling so much. And what ended up happening is, after I started PvPing, I noticed really quickly that the stamina penalty in Dark Souls 3 was huge. And this is something we talk about on my stream quite a lot. If you go back and watch those videos, because they're on the channel, all you have to do is search for Dark Souls 3 network test. You could only pick certain preset classes, and you could only find certain amounts of weapons. And I ended up PvPing with a spear, which is something I never really did, because I didn't like the spears in Dark Souls. I thought they were a bit lame. They're very good, but not always the most fun thing. And it seemed like when you ran out of stamina, if you got hit, you got crumpled and then you got punished really, really severely. And what it led me to believe is I thought that that game was going to have the most strategic and most interesting PvP of all. I thought it was going to be a combination of Dark Souls 1 and Dark Souls 2. It was going to have the danger of the backstabs because the backstabs felt a little bit faster. Because they've still got that whiff animation that Dark Souls 2 created, but they are a little bit more like the classic conventional backstabs, so I was hoping that the backstabs were going to be more of an element of counterplay. That was a Leo hit right then. Did you see that damage? That was an insane amount of damage right there. Really well timed. And one thing I really hoped for was that I wanted players to have to roll intelligently. Because one thing that you can absolutely critique a lot of these games, especially in PvP, like look at me rolling here. On this build, with my endurance at max thanks to Ring of Favour and Protection and over 40 endurance, I can roll about 12 times, which is a lot of rolling in a game about positioning, in a game that's meant to have repercussions for your actions. It's kind of obscene. And this was something that kind of only got worse. Because as much as it looks like we're rolling a lot, compared to modern games, this is nothing. On Dark Souls 1, when you come back and you do a soul level 1 run, if you do 2 attacks and then an R2, all your stamina is gone. It's just gone. Because there's a meaning to your actions on base level. When you play Bloodborne, at Blood level 4, you can roll like 700 times on base stamina. It's weird. And they did that because Bloodborne is a fast game, and it's meant to be more offensive. Whereas Dark Souls, I always got the impression with this game, especially coming from Demons, that they didn't want you to move too fast. They wanted you to think about what you were doing, they wanted you to bring the right tool for the right job and assess it the right way. That was always the impression I got. You can't say the same about Dark Souls 3 or Elden Ring. Now, they want you zipping around using some bullshit dash technique with 9,000 iframes and doing a weapon skill that covers 2 continents. And that's just the game, you know, and everyone's fucking got it. So it's just like, I did the zoom zoom lightning zoom and then you did the bloom bloom splooge of gravity and no one knows what the fuck's happening because it's like watching 2 wizards fight, even though they're both carrying swords. It's it's strange. So, stamina used to be this thing that mattered. Like, look at my stamina then when I blocked that. Did you see how much that cost me? It cost me a lot. And it means that I have to manage it against this player, or he'll crush my guard. And these mechanics still exist, but they didn't feel as weighty and as important as I wanted them to. So in that network test, I was crushing people's stamina and punishing them with riposts, because in Dark Souls 3, when your guard gets broken, you can then be riposted. That doesn't happen in this game. You don't walk up to them and do a nice counter stab. You just get to attack them a little bit and they take instability damage, which is a nice bonus, but it's not the same. You get parried and riposted in this game, you'll lose 1,000 damage depending on what weapon you're on and your armor. That's not the same as getting hit for 400 damage with a katana, you know? Or 500 if you're really lucky, or if you've boosted something. These are different numbers. So when Dark Souls 3 was utilising essentially a mechanic that Dark Souls 2 created in some ways, which was this idea that when you kicked in Dark Souls 2 and you were blocking, you got guard broken. And I think that that's amazing. If this game had that, I'd love it. Because here's the thing, on paper that mechanic sounds overpowered and dumb, right? Because you can get through anyone's block no matter how good their shield is. And maybe you could make it so that the great shields take a few more or something, or certain stabilities are harder to break. There would have been a way to balance it in an intelligent manner. But fundamentally, being able to kick a shield and get a huge advantage, I think is great. And you can do it in this game, but it takes way more. Dark Souls 2 made it so that when you get counterplayed on a kick, you can then be massively punished. And from that understanding, Dark Souls 3 implemented it on the guard crush, where you don't have the stamina to block anymore, you get stunned, you get killed. And one thing that happened in Dark Souls 2, you probably noticed it quite quickly, is at first, everybody who was not very good at the game held their shield like Dark Souls 1, turtling and backpedaling and then coming forward and then not waiting for, like not trying to engage, but waiting for you to do something so they could counter you. So what did you do? You did that stupid push, that stepping push, guard broke them and then you killed them on a riposte. Which was good timing, I just got squashed. That's what you did to tons of players. And then slowly but surely, the bad players kept having it happen, but the good players would see you do that push, and then they'd punish the push. Because they'd either space it and attack it, or they'd maybe get around it and maybe go for a backstab or use magic or whatever the punish for that was. As I mentioned, I barely PvP'd in that game, I couldn't honestly tell you, I hated it. But that's what they did. Players learned to bait that and punish it, and they were not afraid of it because it was a long animation, and if you ever got guard broke by it, it was your fault. That, to me, is exactly what a mechanic should be. It's high risk, high reward, and not everyone's going to get it to work for them, and not everyone's going to fall for it. I think it's a beautiful mechanic. And the fact that Dark Souls 3 had that, I was super hopeful that there was going to be this. You better swing when you should swing, and you better not be holding your block so you can let that stamina regen, and you better not mash roll, because if you do, you'll die. And we now know, because of history, that Dark Souls 3, when it comes to roll spam and being able to get away with fucking murder, was probably one of the worst Souls games in history. The ring I'm using here, guys, the Darkwood Grain Ring, is one of the most hated rings in the entirety of Souls, because it was an absolute scourge on this game. For months, this ring enabled people in insane armor with insane poise carrying insane weapons to flip with greater immunity. More iframes, right? Greater distance, greater speed, greater recovery, more iframes. This ring is overpowered, and I love it. I'll always love it. It's the reason I played Dark Souls, you know this. However, I'm not going to tell you that this ring was not an unhealthy element in this game, because it was. And I miss it. Don't get me wrong, I miss the days where we all ran around in ridiculous armor flipping, because that's what Dark Souls was to me, that's all I knew at the time. However, the people that didn't like it, they suffered it for months until they changed it. And that must have been a really brutal and frustrating experience, because it turned the game into something it almost never should have been. And it's really funny, you know, if you go back and watch like some of Martyr Brigade's videos or some of the other commentators, they talk about no one using Havel's Ring. And this is not an experience I had personally, but you know why this is. The reason why Havel's was slept on by a lot of people for so long is because why would you need Havel's when Darkwood Grainring gave you it for free? It was literally Havel's in a sick flip. Why wouldn't you use it? So I find that really fascinating coming back and watching that. That was a beautiful outplay there. Beautiful prediction, beautiful spacing, and a wonderful use of the rolling R1. That was a super sick fight, one of my favourites. So I am not the guy to try and pretend like rolling has not been a problem in these games. Rolling is always a problem in these games, because when you add latency, it changes everything. Especially when you mess with iframes. Look at Dark Souls 2 with adaptability. I'm not going to talk about adaptability, because truth be told, I can't remember half of the conversation that there is to be had about it, because it's not my game, it's not my horse, you know, the race has nothing to do with me. But I remember it being a problem, and I remember people having a huge issue with it for understandable reasons. We've always had this interesting discourse surrounding rolling in Souls, especially in PvP. So when Dark Souls 3 came out, I got the shock of my life when people started using those weapon skills where you could get through the swamp really fast because they had those dashes that were just obscene. And at first you thought, well, they won't be a problem because they take MP, they take mana to do them, right? If you run out of mana, you can't do it, you're vulnerable. But then you could still kind of do it, and they were still kind of good. And then there was there 2 versions? I forget what it was. I think there was even maybe multiple versions of that roll. There was that ring that made you safer too. There were all these things that made that roll even more obnoxious. And then the more you played, the more you realised that some people would just put that on lightweight and just spam it, and you couldn't do anything. And of course, don't get me wrong when I say you couldn't do anything. When you were new and not very good at the game, it felt like there was no play there. And I would never say that I got good at Dark Souls 3 because I didn't. I didn't put the time in. I didn't like it enough. I had several problems with it. Even though I do think Dark Souls 3's PvP is very good. And I had a lot of fun with what I did play. Look at him going for the parry like a beast. He could have backstabbed me, but he didn't. Did you see that, guys? It's not always about backstabs. That's what these videos are meant to show you. Of course, if you go and invade in the Burg right now, you'll probably bump into someone who'll backstab you every time they can, because that's the bloody game. But every so often, there's a player that's looking for a little bit more. And there's nothing wrong with that, and there's nothing wrong with being the guy that wants to backstab, really. So, Dark Souls 3, for me personally, became this really preposterous role-based game where chasing people and iframes were so strong. Dude, I'm going for a lot of parries here, and it's just not working. That was a pretty terrible showing from me. I guess I had a read on that wasn't really going my way, but there it was. And you might remember at the time, when I was playing Dark Souls 3, if you look at the videos, because they're all on YouTube if you're interested, I did a bunch of different series, and I called them something, you know, specific. They've all got like some fancy-sounding name of something that I'm either using or that I'm thinking about, and I PvP'd as the pink guy. I forget what he is. He can like attack everybody. I did some pink guy invasions, I did some standard invasions, and I think that was about it. I did maybe a little bit of hosting in Irithyll, but I wasn't hosting after Pontiff where everybody was dueling. I was hosting at the beginning because I used to find a lot of traffic there, and I quite liked the diversity of people. And I played a decent amount. I tried to get some invasions in all the different locations. I remember doing a lot of PvP in the dragon area. That was a fun place to invade. And if you know the game, you'll know that Dark Souls 3 introduced this mechanic where you would favour a host with phantoms. So on Dark Souls 1, when you invade anyone within level. Infinite up, 10% down, depending on your covenant and things. And what happens is you don't know who you're going to get. Sometimes you'll get a dude who's on a playthrough, sometimes you'll get a PvP guy, sometimes you'll find a fight club, sometimes you'll find gankers, sometimes you'll find corpers. You found pretty much everything. And that's what made it so exciting. That's what made invasions so addictive. In Dark Souls 3, all my invasions were ganks. All of them. I don't think I ever fought a lone host once. It just never happened. And I hosted in lots of places. I've got fond memories of running through Irithyll away from gankers, trying to overcome them. And if you know Dark Souls 3, you'll know that straight swords were really strong and bleed at the start of that game. Those were the big ones, and also hyper armor. Big swords with hyper armor were your go-to to fight against groups because they changed how the backstabs worked. The backstabs were a combination of Dark Souls 2 and Dark Souls 1, but without that vacuum and without that security, they just weren't as viable. And it made fighting gankers a lot more difficult. However, if you put the time in to learn, some of the setups and learn the new tech, you could get a lot better at fighting them and be a lot more successful. And you could argue, and I would definitely be open to hearing it, the idea that beating gankers in Dark Souls 3 is harder and more skillful than beating gankers in Dark Souls 1. I'm going to put a footnote on this though, because it's ignorance. I only PvP'd in Dark Souls 3 for about 2 or 3 months, and then after that I wandered off and I never came back, and I probably never will. So I don't know how that game developed. I don't know how the meta went, I don't know how the tech went, I don't know any of these answers. It's not my game. So there might be all this really cool stuff that you do that shuts everybody down and gives you super success, which makes it mad easy. I wasn't there for that. But in my experience, when I was playing, I used to use the Karthus curved sword before it was meta, because I didn't realise it was meta, I just thought it looked fucking cool because I felt like Sinbad. And then it turned out that weapon was really, really, really strong. Back when the washing pole was really strong as well. And I also used, there was a great sword that had lightning on it, if anybody remembers that one. That was my go-to, put it on, swing it left and right like the Zweihander in this game. That was my anti-ganker tool, and those were the ones I used. And every so often I'd go for a bit of a parry, but without backstabs, speaking of, I did not feel confident or comfortable in my ability to outplay a lot of the situations I was put into because I could not outdamage their healing capacity. And to me, that felt quite frustrating, and it ended up putting me off a lot of the invasions. And then the second thing, which was the one I didn't expect at all, is right now I'm dueling. I don't always like dueling. Sometimes I do, sometimes I don't. I'm quite capricious. And I go through phases of wanting this or wanting that. And I don't know about you guys, but when I really want something, I don't want the other things. My brain is odd. And it's not unique, but it's what's happening. So in this situation, right now, I am super dually. My brain's like, 1v1 me bro, let's go, this is fucking great, I'll do it for hours, and I'm having a great time. It's nostalgic, it's fun, I'm de-rustifying and everything. So the idea of invasions right now, I don't care. My brain doesn't even matter. But in time, that will change. Because in Dark Souls 3, I did not want to duel. I did not want to go to the Pontiff area and fight in that circle, which would have made sense to be an ultimate ganking area, but instead everyone was dueling. I didn't want to do it. I didn't want to stand in the top of the high wall of Lothric and duel there like we did in the network test. I wanted to invade. I wanted to go into a world and I wanted to come up against a diverse amount of people, and I wanted lone hosts, I wanted like twinks, I wanted new people, I wanted corpers, I wanted an experience I could not have. And to make it even worse, which if you were there at the time and you watch the videos, you'll hear me contest to this, I used to also invade a lot of fucking fight clubs. And I come from Dark Souls 1. Dark Souls 1's all about fight clubs. I've gone to fight clubs all over Lordran, Japanese fight clubs, streamer fight clubs, you name it. I've watched them, I've lurked in them. I've not taken part in too many, but some of them I've tried, and I was in the vicinity, I didn't want to do fight clubs anymore. I'd done that. I'd done the formal dueling. I wanted the chaos. But of course, sometimes I want doesn't get. So I remember invading in the Crucifix Woods. And I'm expecting gankers, because I used to get a lot of gankers there. It was a forest, right? My brain goes, is this the new forest? You say the forest to a Dark Souls 1 PvPer, he knows exactly what you mean. He's expecting to be outnumbered, he's expecting Hornet Rings, he's expecting all the dirty tactics, because that's what the forest was for. That's what we all grew to understand. The kiln fell, and it became like that. Even the Burg fell at one point and became like that, but the forest was the constant. It was always like that, so expecting anything different was just foolish. So when I go to these woods expecting a forest experience, which again might be my fault, might be my own, expectations being pushed on the game, and I'm running up to an area where I think people are going to be, and I see a bunch of prism stones and people sat down, I don't want a fucking fight club. This is ridiculous. Why are you fight clubbing in the forest? It just seemed alien to me. So I ended up crashing a lot of fight clubs and getting ganked. And I don't mind that, that's fair enough. If you fuck with a fight club, expect everybody to come for you. That's just how it works. I know how it works, you know how it works. It's just tribalism, isn't it? But it's not what I wanted. So I invaded in some of the catacomb areas and different places, and I did what I could, and I made a bunch of videos, but I lost the luster and the interest in PvPing. Because what I valued was no longer there. And the thing that I valued the most is pretty much exactly what you're watching right now. And at the time, I didn't really know what it was. I didn't know if it was just me being like a hypocrite. I didn't realise if it was just me being burned out, maybe the formula wasn't there. And the more I think about it, I can think of some pretty compelling reasons, but fundamentally, we never got Dark Souls 1 again. Because Dark Souls 1, I think, was this interesting cauldron of happy accidents. It's the ultimate Bob Ross painting of a video game. And that is both for better and for worse. There's a lot of problems with this game. There's a lot of oddities, there's a lot of stupid stuff, there's a lot of things that we wish could be different and that we just can't understand why they were ever the way they were. But in spite of it, we still love it. And that love, you'd think it would either fade or kind of solidify, but it's just permeating and continuing. And you do find that absence is fantastic at multiplying an emotion. And of course, as you get older, as I have, it's been 10 years. 10 years is a long time. It's a decade, As you get older, you tend to be a little softer, a little more emotional. Because I think you start to really value that this is not infinite. Time is precious, and how you spend it is a reflection of who you are and of what you value. And it's funny that even now, this to me is like the only place I really want to be in video games. There's nowhere else I'd rather be, as far as this medium pertains. And there's lots of games I'm playing right now. I'm playing Luigi's Mansion 2 on the emulator, and it's amazing. I'm playing it at like 1000 FPS. It feels great. I'm stuck, because I can't figure out what to do with this weird ghost, but I'm having a great time, I've also got the first Descendant that I've been messing around with. I've been playing some Darkness 2. I've been playing lots of hodgepodges and different things. I'm playing a lot of God of War 2 because it's an absolute masterpiece and I adore it. Like, there's tons to play. There's Wukong coming out very shortly. I'm getting a key for Visions of Mana, potentially. Like, there's all these things I could be doing. And yet, I am standing in the Burg, trading blows in a game I have thousands of hours in. And I couldn't be happier. And the cool thing is it lets me make this video, it lets me make this commentary, and it lets me share it with you. And you might be new and just being like, this is a cool video, I like this, what is this game? And that's sick. But chances are you're not. Chances are you might have watched my old Dark Souls videos when you were a teenager. And now you've got a family, you've got responsibilities, you've got all these things that change, all these developments in life that we all go through. And even though your life couldn't be any more different than when it was when you had infinite time and you were young and you were in, studying and a student, but the one universal constant is this. Backsteps into running attacks on katanas, Darkwood grain rings, the sound of hits landing, the sound of my armor jiggling, You know, the sound of an acerbic Englishman talking at length over a video in the background. That's the same. And although I'm different, you're different, the world is different. Lordran is here, and we're fighting again inside of it, and the quality's a bit higher, and the gameplay, I can't talk of that quality, but it's there. It's a fascination, especially knowing just how much I wanted things to be like Dark Souls, and then they never were. And it's funny now, because I saw Brandon on Twitch earlier on. For people that don't know Brandon, he's called Uraburo, the serpent eating itself. He's an old school Dark Souls guy. He was around for Demon Souls. He was known for the Dark Moonblade Falchion. And he'd come up to you in his Elite Knight set with his poise and just crush the shit out of you, as I get parried right there. Nice parry. And chances are, if you know me or you've watched Dark Souls, you know that name. I saw him playing a game, I think it's called Dungeonborn. It's like this first-person, dungeon crawly, PvP-y game that's fantasy-based, and I've seen that key advertised to me. I could have requested it as well. And I looked into it, and I just don't think it's my thing. However, when I saw him playing it, I thought, oof. Can you imagine, guys, if this is the new Demon Souls? Can you imagine if this turns into this wonderful, eclectic and bizarre world? And inside of it, we end up forming this circle, this bubble of people that get it. The in-crowd of this really odd thing. Because you might have noticed I've not talked about Elden Ring. And I'm probably not going to. Fundamentally, because Elden Ring now is so mainstream, it's changed everything. 25 million copies. Everyone and their mother knows about it. No one's played Dark Souls, everyone's played Elden Ring. And it's fascinating, isn't it? Because these games, when you really think about it, they're not that different, and yet they are entirely different. You look at the engine, you'll notice that when you do a crouch attack on a greatsword in Elden Ring, it is the exact same attack you do when you roll with a Zweihand two-handed. Exactly the same. Nothing really ever changes. However, the PvP in Elden Ring is not like what you're watching. The only thing they have in common is the lag. That's it, really, isn't it? That game is just baffling. And when Elden Ring first came out, my game stuttered. Stuttered something fierce. And if you watched my PvE, you'll remember. So I never actually PvP'd in that game. And I've watched a lot of footage, but I still haven't really passed judgment. I just don't think it'll be for me. But I'll continue this tangent, guys, in the next video. Thank you for being here, thank you for watching, and you take care now.